Good afternoon everybody and welcome to the stream. I've had my vaccine and I apologise if this is slightly more of a shambles than usual, as it was a bit of a rush to get everything set up in time. Still, we're here now. So, I guess we should just get into it, shouldn't we? Oh, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Robert from El Magnifico Games. There we go. So, yes, poetry. Last week, I believe we finished off on To a Highland Girl at Inverness upon Loch Lomond. How was that pronounced, actually? I've got a feeling... I don't think I ever definitively looked up the pronunciation, but I remember that the spelling has changed of that particular place. Yes, Inverness. It looks like it's probably pronounced. So that's where we finished off last week. So I will begin by rereading it, and then we will head on to new poems, and we will analyse those ones in more detail. So, To a Highland Girl at Inverness upon Loch Lomond. Oh goodness me. I haven't even said, this is by Wordsworth, who is this gentleman. We briefly looked at who he was in one of our previous streams. I don't remember if that was the last one or possibly the one before that. I think we've been on Wordsworth a little while now. There's a fair few poems of his in this anthology. Anyway, as I was saying, to a Highland girl at Inversnaid upon Loch Lomond. Sweet Highland girl, a very shower of beauty is thy earthly dower. Twice 7 consenting years have shed their utmost bounty on thy head, and these grey rocks, that household lawn, those trees of ale just half withdrawn, this fall of water that doth make a murmur near the silent lake, this little bay, a quiet road, that holds in shelter thy abode. In truth together do ye seem like something fashioned in a dream, such forms as from their covert peep, when earthly cares are laid asleep. But, O fair creature, in the light of common day so heavenly bright, I bless thee, vision as thou art, I bless thee with a human heart. God shield thee to thy latest years, thee neither know... My apologies. Thee neither know I nor thy peers, and yet my eyes are filled with tears. With earnest feelings I shall pray for thee when I am far away, for never saw I mien or face in which more plainly I could trace benignity and homebred sense ripening in perfect innocence. Here scattered like a random seed remote from men, thou dost not need the embarrassed look of shy distress and maidenly shamefacedness. Thou wast upon thy forehead clear the freedom of a mountaineer. My apologies again. Thou wearest upon thy forehead clear the freedom of a mountaineer. A face with gladness overspread, so smiles by human kindness bred, in seemliness complete that sways, thy curtsies about thee plays, with no restraint but such as springs from quick and eager visitings of thoughts that lie beyond the reach of thy few words of English speech, a bondage sweetly brooked, a strife that gives thy gesture grace and life. So have I, not unmoved in mind, seen birds of tempest, loving kind, thus beating up against the wind. What hand but would a garland cull for thee who art so beautiful? O happy pleasure here to dwell beside thee in some heathy dell. Adopt your homely ways and dress, a shepherd thou a shepherdess. But I could frame a wish for thee, more like a grave reality. Thou art to me but as a wave of the wild sea, and I would have some claim upon thee, if I could. Though but of common neighbourhood, what joy to hear thee, and to see thy elder brother I would be, thy father, anything to thee. Now thanks to heaven, that of its grace have led me to this lonely place, joy have I had, and going hence, I bear away my recompense. In spots like these it is we prize our memory, feel that she hath eyes. Then why should I be loth to stir? I feel this place was made for her, to give new pleasure. My apologies, that should be loathe. That's an archaic spelling of loathe. Then why should I be loath to stir? I feel this place was made for her, to give new pleasure like the past, continued long as life shall last. Nor am I loath, though pleased at heart, sweet Highland girl, from thee to part. For I, methinks, till I grow old, as fair before shall behold, as I do now, the cabin small, the lake, the bay, the waterfall, and thee the spirit of them all. So I apologise about the number of mistakes I made whilst reading that, but yes, that is the poem that we left off on last week. So, we've already discussed that one. We will move on to The Solitary Reaper. So I'll begin with the first reading and then we will analyse it. The Solitary Reaper. Behold her single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing by herself. Stop here or gently pass. Alone she cuts and binds the grain, and sings a melancholy strain. Oh listen, for the vale profound is overflowing with the sound. No nightingale did ever chant more welcome notes to weary bands of travellers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. A voice so thrilling never was heard in springtime from the cuckoo bird, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. Will no one tell me what she sings? Perhaps the plaintive numbers flow for old unhappy far off things and battles long ago. Or is it some more humble lay, familiar matter of today, some natural sorrow, loss or pain that has been and may be again? Whatever the theme, the maiden sang, as if a song could have no ending. I saw her singing at her work, and o'er the sickle bending. I listened, motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. So that's a very nice piece, isn't it? It seems to have moved away from the more commonplace, general laying compliments upon a young lady, who it's often implied the speaker is infatuated with, though not always, admittedly, or perhaps sees some deeper beauty in, an artistic beauty. But in this case it seems, although there is clearly a female subject, the Highland Lass, it seems to me that the poem dwells more upon the moment, and the experience, perhaps, of coming across this young lady singing in a field, and of course, considering all the things that it is similar to other experiences. So in that way, I think it manages to be a little more, what would be the word? A little more distinctive than some of the other poetry we've read so far in this series. Now, as for rhythm and rhyme, what do we have? So we seem, looking at the first stanza, we have an A, B, C, B, followed by a D, D, E, E. That's interesting. Off the top of my head, I don't recognise that as an established form. It might be, and I just don't recognise it. But it's interesting because it's clearly structured, but doesn't, as I say, follow what I recognise to be an established form. What do we have after that? We have AB, AB, CC, DD, starting the lettering over again. A, B, A, B, D, D, E, E. Well, I skipped C, didn't I? That should have been C, C, D, D. Yeah, okay, so the second stanza seems to be a consistent A, B, A, B, C, C, D, D. And it repeats itself once. And then we end on yet another A, B, C, B, D, D, E, E. Like the first stanza. That's interesting. That is really quite well formed. Like, there is a very definite structure there, as far as the rhyme's concerned. But I do not recognise it. I do not know it as an established form. I like it. I can see advantages to such a structure, but I don't recall seeing it before. Of course, that could just be my memory. Anyway, That's the rhyming structure. What about rhythm? Yes, as I thought when I was reading it, I think there's certainly a tendency towards iambic tetrameter here, but is it... Is that consistent? We definitely have some trimeter here as well. But it's not a ballad, because they're not alternating. There's quite a few instances, actually, of 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet, and so on. But not, again, not consistently, but there is a fair amount of that. No, I don't think this has a consistent metrical structure. I think it varies a bit. Although it varies within a fairly narrow range, it seems to want to go between iambic, tetrameters and trimeters. That should be trimeters, shouldn't I? I'm not emphasising the start of the word enough. Tetrameters and trimeters, which is interesting. There was a particular line when I was rereading it then that I thought was interesting. Where was that? Reaping and singing by herself. That's an interesting line, isn't it? Because the reaping and singing cannot be... If we're dealing with a... Oh, what's it called when you have 2 feet per a... Sorry, two syllables per a foot. There's a proper name for that, isn't it? Just a second. Oh, it's binary and ternary feet, isn't it? Yes. So what I was saying was, with a line like reaping and singing by herself, if you have a binary foot, then reaping and singing cannot be stressed the same. So I think the stress should be reaping, not reaping, reaping, and singing. But how would you achieve that using just binary feet? It would be reaping, which is a trochee, and singing. Oh, of course, that's easy. That's just a trochaic inversion on the first foot. By herself. And that's just a feminine ending. Okay, so you'll have to forgive me. I think I'm... I don't think you're seeing me at my best at the moment. Yep, so that works. Oh, listen, for the veil profound is overflowing with the sound. Yep, so I'd say it's, broadly speaking, iambic tetrameter with some trimeters in there as well. The rhyme we've talked about, the meaning we've talked about. I don't think there's any particularly difficult words there. So, if anyone in chat would like to discuss this more, by all means leave a comment and we will do so. As for my part, I think we've largely got everything we're going to out of this particular poem, so I'll move on to the final reading and then on to the subsequent poem if nobody's left anything to discuss. So, once again, the solitary reaper. Behold her single in the field, yon solitary highland lass, reaping and singing by herself, stop here or gently pass. Alone she cuts and binds her grain, and sings a melancholy strain. Oh, listen, for the vale profound is overflowing with the sound. No nightingale did ever chant more welcome notes to weary bands of travellers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. A voice so thrilling never was heard in springtime from the cuckoo bird, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. Will no one tell me what she sings? Perhaps the plaintive numbers flow for old unhappy far-off things and battles long ago. Or is it some more humble lay, familiar, matter of today? Some natural sorrow, loss or pain that has been and may be again. Whatever the theme, the maiden sang, as if her song could have no ending. I saw her singing at her work, and o'er the sickle bending. I listened, motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. You know, I must say, after a second reading, I think I appreciate it more. It really is rather a nice little poem, isn't it? Anyway, on to the next one. Intimations of immortality from recollections of early childhood. Interesting. What does he mean by intimations? Does that mean just the discussion of matters in an intimate way, like intimate observations, or the act of intimating? That's what I'd assume. And intimating is closely acquainted, familiar, of or involved in a sexual relationship, personal, private, pertaining to details that require great familiarity to know. Yes, I would suggest that's what he means by intimations of immortality. So, details that could be gleaned about immortality that you would have to know the subject with great familiarity to know, I would assume. We shall see. Anyway, where was I? The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light. The glory and the freshness of a dream, it is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn whatsoever I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth, but yet I know wherever I go that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Now while the birds doth sing a joyous song, and while the young lambs bound as to the tabor's sound, to me alone there came a thought of grief, a timely utterance gave that thought relief, and again I am strong. The cataracts blow their trumpets from the steep, no more shall grief of mine the season wrong. My apologies. No more shall grief of mine the season wrong. I hear the echoes from the mountain throng. The winds come to me from the fields of sleep, and all the earth is gay. Land and sea give themselves up to jollity, and with the heart of May doth every beast keep holiday. Thou child of joy, shout round me, let me hear thy shouts, thou happy shepherd boy. Ye blessed creatures, I have heard the call, ye to each other make, I see, the heavens laugh with you in your jubilee. My heart is at your festival, my head hath its coronal. The fullness of your bliss I feel it all. O evil day, if I was sullen, while earth herself is adorning the sweet May morning, and the children are culling on every side, in a thousand valleys far and wide, fresh flowers while the sun shines warm, and the babe leaps up on his mother's arm. I hear, with joy I hear, but there's a tree of many one, a single field which I have looked upon. Both of them speak of something that is gone. The pansy at my feet doth the same tale repeat. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come, from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. Earth fills her lap with pleasures of her own, yearning she have in her own natural kind, and even with something of a mother's mind, and no unworthy aim. The homely earth doth all she can to make a foster child her inmate man, forget the glories he hath known, and that imperial palace whence he came. Behold the child among his newborn blisses, a 6 years darling of a pygmy size. See where mid-work of his own hand he lies, fretted by sallies of his mother's kisses, with light upon him from his father's eyes. See at his feet some little plan or chart, some fragment from his dream of human life, shaped by himself with newly learned art, a wedding or a festival, a mourning or a funeral, and this hath now his heart, and unto this he frames his song. Then will he fit his tongue to dialogues of business, love, or strife. But it will not be long ere this be thrown aside, and with new joy and pride the little actor cons another part, filling from time to time his humorous stage with all the persons down to palsied age that life brings with her in her equipage, as if her whole vocation were endless imitation. Thou, though exterior semblance thou, whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity, thou best philosopher who yet doth keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind, that deaf and silent readest the eternal deep, haunted for ever by the eternal mind, mighty prophet, seer blessed, on whose truths do rest, which we are toiling all our lives to find, in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave. Thou, over whom thy immortality broods like the day, a master o'er a slave, a present which is not to be put by, to whom the grave is but a lonely bed without the sense or light. Is but a lonely bed without the sense or sight of day or the warm light, a place of thought where we are in waiting lie. Thou little child, yet glorious in the might of heaven-born freedom on thy being's height, why with such earnest pains dost thou provoke the years to bring the inevitable yoke, thus blind with thy blessedness at strife? For soon thy soul shall have her earthly freight, and custom lie upon thee with a weight, heavy as frost and deep almost as life. O joy, that in our embers is something that doth live, that nature yet remembers what was so fugitive. The thought of our past years in me doth breed perpetual benediction, not indeed for that which is most worthy to be blessed, delight and liberty, the simple creed of childhood, whether busy or at rest, with new-fledged hope still fluttering in his breast. Not for these I raise the song of thanks and praise, but for those obstinate questionings of sense and outward things, falling from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature, moving about in worlds not realized, high instincts before which our mortal nature did tremble like a guilty thing surprised. But for those first affections, those shadowy recollections, which, be they what they may, and yet the fountain light of all our day, and yet a master light of all our seeing, uphold us, cherish, and have power to make our noisy years seem moments in the being of the eternal silence, truths that wake, to perish never, with neither listlessness nor mad endeavour, nor man nor boy, nor all that is enmity with joy, can utterly abolish or destroy. Hence in a season of calm weather, though inland far we be, ourselves have sight of that immortal sea, which brought us hither, can in a moment travel thither, and see the children sport upon the shore, and hear the mighty waters rolling evermore. Then sing, ye birds, sing, sing a joyous song, and let the young lambs bound, as to the tabor's sound. We in thought will join your throng, ye that pipe and ye that play, ye that through your hearts today feel the gladness of the May. What though the radiance which was once so bright be now for ever taken from my sight, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendid in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind, in the primal sympathy which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, in the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the philosophic mind. And oh, ye fountains, meadows, hills, and groves, forebode not any severing of our loves, yet in my heart of hearts I feel your might. I only have relinquished one delight, to live beneath your more habitual sway. I love the brooks which down their channels fret, even more than when I tripped lightly as they. The innocent brightness of a newborn day is lovely yet. The clouds that gather round the setting sun do take a sombre colouring from an eye that have kept watch o'er man's mortality. Another race hath been, and other palms are won, thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joys and fears. To me the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Whew, quite a lot to look at there. I hate to say it, but this is such a long and detailed poem that perhaps I'll have to do a relatively incomplete analysis of it, just looking at parts of it. Otherwise that'll be the entirety of the rest of the poetry section of this stream. Let me see, does Wikipedia have a page on this particular piece? Yes. Okay, so I think just as at first instance it may be worth having a quick look through that page, seeing what Wikipedia has to say about it, because I'm sure it has many observations that I wouldn't have made. And then we'll give a quick look to its structure and probably thereabouts move on to the next poem, I should think. Keep things moving. So, Ode, Imitations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood is a poem by William Wordsworth, completed in 1804 and published in Poems in 2 volumes, 1807. The poem was completed in 2 parts, with the first 4 stanzas written among a series of poems composed in 1802 about childhood. The first part of the poem was completed on the 27th of March. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. The 4th stanza of the ode ends with a question, and Wordsworth was finally able to answer it with 7 additional stanzas completed in early 1804. So what was the 4th one? Doth the same tale repeat, whither is fled with visionary gleam, where it is now the glory and the dream? Let me go back further. Let me read all of the 4th stanza again. Ye blessed creatures, I've heard the call. Ye to each other make, I see, the heavens laugh when you in your jubilee. My heart is at your festival, my head have its coronal. The fullness of your bliss I feel it all. O evil day, if I was sullen, while earth herself is adorning this sweet May morning, and the children are culling on every side, in 1,000 valleys far and wide, fresh flowers while the sun shines warm, and the babe leaps up on her mother's arm. I hear, with joy I hear, but there's a tree, of many, one, a single field which I have looked upon. Both of them speak of something that is gone. The pansy at my feet doth the same tale repeat. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? So that's the question that's raised. The poem is an irregular Pindaric ode in 11 stanzas that combines aspects of Coleridge's conversation poems, the religious sentiments of the Bible and the work of St. Augustine, and aspects of the elegiac and apocalyptic traditions. I was thinking that the form at face value seemed a little irregular, so I'm not surprised to hear that it's a deviation from an established style. Now, which one was the Pindaric? Was a term for a class of loose and irregular odes greatly in fashion in England during the close of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century. Really? That's earlier then? Because Wordsworth was writing in the 19th century. Pindaric came to be commonly used for complimentary poems on births, weddings and funerals. Although the vogue of these forms hardly survived the age of Queen Anne, something of the tradition still remained, and even in the odes of Wordsworth, Shelley and Coleridge, the broken versification of Cowley's Pindarics occasionally survives. Tennyson's ode on the death of the Duke of Wellington may be considered another specimen of a Pindaric in English literature, as seen for example in the opening and closing lines. What else does it say? Does it mention anything about the form? Cowley's Resurrection, which was considered in the 17th century to be a model of the Pindaric style, is a formless poem of 64 lines, arbitrarily divided not into triads, but into 4 stanzas of unequal volume and structure. The lines which form these stanzas are of lengths varying from 3 feet to 7 feet. This one certainly varies a lot. I've certainly seen lines of only 2 feet and up to 5. Possibly more. I'd have to examine them more closely. With rhymes repeated in no order. It was the looseness of these Pindarics that appealed to many poets at the close of the 17th century, including John Dryden, Aphra Behn and Alexander Pope, and many lesser poets such as John Oldham, Thomas Outway, Thomas Spratt, John Hughes and Thomas Flatman. Okay, so I think that's enough about the structure. We know that it's loose, but it follows... It takes some of the aspects of more rigid forms and it will repeat them almost as tropes or tactics, as it were, if I'm understanding that correctly. So like how it says about how rhymes are repeated, but irregularly so. Which might explain... I'm not suggesting the previous poem we looked at necessarily was a Pindaric, but I mentioned before how it seemed to... there was a certain structure that was enforced, but it was a bit loose about whether lines were supposed to rhyme... whether rhymes were supposed to alternate, or whether it was rhyming couplets or what have you. That would also figure here. So that makes sense. I would say, incidentally, when I was reading this, I was thinking how surprisingly advanced the poetry was, particularly in terms of its looseness. And it's interesting to see that this form of poetry, the Pindaric ode, apparently was most popular... What would it have been? It would have been about 150 years before this was written. I think I made a similar remark, though about slightly different aspects, when I was reading some of Shakespeare's poetry, wasn't I? The fact that I found it remarkable how advanced poetry was by that point. It really is surprising how early English poetry peaked in sophistication, I would suggest. Anyway, what else do we have here? So we've read a bit about the style. What does does it have to say about the background? A divine morning at breakfast, W.M. wrote part of an ode. That must be short for William, as in William Wordsworth. Mr. Olive sent the dung and W.M. went to work in the garden. We sate all day in the orchard. In 1802, Wordsworth wrote many poems that dealt with his youth. These poems were partly inspired by his conversations with his sister Dorothy, whom he was living with in the Lake District at the time. The poems beginning with The Butterfly and ending with To the Cuckoo were all based on Wordsworth recalling both the sensory and emotional experience of his childhood. From To the Cuckoo he moved on to The Rainbow, both written on the 26th of March 1802, and then on to Ode, Intimation of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. As he moved from poem to poem, he began to question why, as a child, he once was able to see an immortal presence within nature, but as an adult that was fading away, except in the few moments he was able to meditate on the experiences found in poems like To the Cuckoo. While sitting at breakfast on the 27th of March, he began to compose the ode. He was able to write 4 stanzas that put forth the question about the faded image and ended, "Where is it now, the glory and the dream?" The poem would remain in its smaller 4-stanza version until 1804. The short version of the ode was possibly finished in one day because Wordsworth left the next day to spend time with Samuel Taylor Coleridge in Keswick. Close to the time Wordsworth and Coleridge climbed the Skiddaw Mountain, the 3rd of April 1802, Wordsworth recited the 4 stanzas of the ode that were completed. The poem impressed Coleridge, and while with Wordsworth he was able to provide his response to the ode's question within an early draft of his poem Dejection, an Ode. In early 1804, Wordsworth was able to return his attention to working on the ode. It was a busy beginning of the year, with Wordsworth having to help Dorothy recover from an illness in addition to writing his poems. The exact time of the composition is unknown, but it probably followed his work on the Prelude, which consumed much of February and was finished on the 17th of March. Many of the lines of the ode are similar to the lines of the Prelude Book 5, and he used the rest of the ode to try to answer the question at the end of the 4th stanza. The poem was first printed in full The ode contains 11 stanzas split into 3 movements. The first movement is 4 stanzas long and discusses the narrator's inability to see the divine glory of nature, the problem of the poem. Ooh. I like this. I hadn't considered it before, but it sounds like they're setting up the poem almost with a question and answer structure, like you might see from an essay. I mean, now that it's pointed out to me, I can see that that's what the poem is doing, but it just hadn't quite... the penny hadn't quite dropped until I read that. That's a very intriguing idea. The second movement is 4 stanzas long and has a negative response to the problem. The third movement is 3 stanzas long and contains a positive response to the problem. The ode begins by contrasting the narrator's view of the world as a child and as a man with what was once alive interconnected to the divine fading away. That actually reminds me of some of the early Greek poetry. I've forgotten what form it was, but there was a particular form of poetry, I believe, which did that, where they would start by raising, not so much a problem, but raising a... well, I suppose it really is a question, isn't it? Raising a question, and then there would be... they would make some points pointing one way, and then they would conclude the other with some counterpoints, if I recall correctly. I wonder if that actually is the Pindaric Ode that I'm thinking of. Just a second, I am reading a physical book that's in front of me. So first there's a theme, followed by... So the first part of a Pindaric establishes a theme, the next would express doubt, and then the final part tries to unite the two ideas or come down in favour of one view or the other. So yes, it was the Pindaric. So I have come across this structure before. Clearly it's just my memory that that's the problem. Like I say, I believe that this type of poetry actually came from ancient Greek poetry, but that then, as happens a lot, is adopted by various English scholarly figures and may change to fit the aspects and properties of the English language better. Anywho, where were we? The ode begins by contrasting the narrator's view of the world as a child and as a man, and with what was once a life interconnected to the divine fading away. In the second and third stanzas, the narrator continues by describing his surroundings and the various aspects of nature that he is no longer able to feel. He feels as if he is separated from the rest of nature until he experiences a moment that brings about feelings of joy that are able to overcome his despair. The joy in stanza 3 slowly fades again in stanza 4 as the narrator feels like there is something that is gone. As the stanza ends, the narrator asks two different questions to end the first movement of the poem, though they appear to be similar. One asks where the visions are now, while the other doesn't, and they leave open the possibility that the visions could return. The second movement begins in stanza 5 by answering the question of stanza 4 by describing a Platonic system of pre-existence. The narrator explains how humans start in an ideal world that slowly fades into a shadowy life. Before the light fades away as the child matures, the narrator emphasizes the greatness of the child experiencing the feelings. By the beginning of stanza 8, the child is described as a great individual, and the stanza is written in the form of a prayer that praises the attributes of children. The end of stanza 8 brings about the end of a second movement within the poem. The glories of nature are only described as existing in the past, and the child's understanding of mortality is already causing them to lose what they once had. The question in stanza 4 are answered with the words of despair in the second movement, but the third movement is filled with joy. Stanza 9 contains a mixture of affirmation of life and faith as it seemingly avoids discussing what is lost. The stanza describes how a child is able to see what others do not see because children do not comprehend mortality, and the imagination allows an adult to intimate immortality and bond with his fellow man. The children on the shore represent the adult's narrator's recollections of childhood, and the recollection allows for an intimation of returning to that mental state. In stanza 11, the imagination allows one to know that there are limits to the world, but also allows for a return to the state of sympathy with the world, lacking any questions or concerns. The poem concludes with an affirmation that, though they changed by time, the narrator is able to be the same person he once was. So, I think that explains the poem far better than I could have done on my own. So we've certainly looked at the structure of the poem and the meaning. Strictly speaking, I should go over the poem and pick out all the words I don't recognise and look them up. But for the sake of time, I think I may skip that in this instance, move on to the final reading, and then we should be able to get one more poem in, this time by a different author, because this is the last poem by William Wordsworth in this anthology. We should be able to get one more poem in before we move on to reading through some more Frankenstein. So, let's do that. Oh, I should say, if anyone watching has any questions or even just something you'd like to discuss, please leave a comment and we will do so. That is always a possibility. Anyway, I will now move on to the final reading, and once I've finished doing so, I will then check chat for any comments. So, intimations of immortality from recollections of early childhood. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn whatsoever I may, by night or day, the things which I've seen I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth, but yet I know, wherever I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Now while the birds thus sing a joyous song, and while the young lambs bound as to the tableau's sound, to me alone there came a thought of grief. A timely utterance gave that thought relief, and I again am strong. The cataracts blow their trumpets from the steep. No more shall grief of mine the season wrong. I hear the echoes through the mountains throng. The winds come to me from fields of sleep, and all the earth is gay. Land and sea give themselves up to jollity, and with the heart of May doth every beast keep holiday. Thou child of joy, shout round me, let me hear thy shouts, thou happy shepherd boy. Ye blessed creatures, I have heard the call, ye to each other make, I see. The heavens laugh with you in your jubilee. My heart is at your festival, my head hath its coronal. The fullness of your bliss I feel it all. O evil day, if I were sullen, while the earth herself is adorning, the sweet May morning, and the children are culling on every side, in a thousand valleys far and wide, fresh flowers while the sun shines warm, and the babe leaps up on his mother's arm. I hear, with joy I hear. But there's a tree of many, one, a single field which I have looked upon, both of them speak of something that is gone. The pansy at my feet doth the same tale repeat. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come, from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. Fills her lap with pleasures of her own, yearnings she have in her own natural kind, and, even with something of a mother's mind, and no unworthy aim, the homely nurse does all she can, to make a foster child her inmate man, forget the glories he hath known, and that imperial palace whence he came. Behold the child among his newborn blisses, a 6 years darling of pygmy size. See where mid work of his own hands he lies, fretted by sallies of his mother's kisses, with light upon him from his father's eyes. See at his feet some little plan or chart, some fragment from his dream of human life, shaped by himself with newly learned art. A wedding or a festival, a mourning or a funeral, and this hath now his heart, and unto he frames a song. Then will he fit his tongue to dialogues of business, love, or strife, but it will not be long ere this be thrown aside, and with new joy and pride the little actor cons another part, filling from time to time his humorous stage with all the persons down to palsied age that life brings with her in her equipage, as if his whole vocation were endless imitation. Though whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity, thou best philosopher who yet doth keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind, that deaf and silent readest the eternal deep, haunted forever by the Eternal's mind. Mighty prophet, seer blessed, on whom those truths do rest, which we are toiling all our lives to find, in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave, Thou over whom thy immortality broods like the day, a master o'er a slave, a presence which is not to be put by, to whom the grave is but a lonely bed without the sense or sight of day or the warm light, a place of thought where we are in waiting lie. Thou little child, yet glorious in the might of heaven-born freedom on thy being's height, why with such earnest pains dost thou provoke the years to bring the inevitable yoke, thus blindly with thy blessedness at strife? Full soon thy soul shall have her earthly freight, and custom lie upon thee with a weight, heavy as frost and deep almost as life. O joy, that in our embers is something that doth live, that nature yet remembers what was so fugitive. The thought of our past years in me doth breed perpetual benediction, not indeed for that which is most worthy to be blessed, delight and liberty, the simple creed of childhood, whether busy or at rest, with new fledged hope still fluttering in his breast. Not for these I raise the song of thanks and praise, but for these obstinate questionings of sense and outward things, fallings from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized, high instincts before which our mortal nature did tremble like guilty things surprised, but for those first affections, those shadowy recollections, which, be they what they may, are yet the fountain light of all our day, are yet a master light of all our seeing, uphold us, cherish, and have power to make a noisy year seem moments in the being of the eternal silence, truths that wake, to perish never, which neither listless nor mad endeavour, nor man nor boy, nor all that is the enmity with joy, can utterly abolish or destroy. Hence in a season of calm weather, though inland far we be, ourselves have sight of that immortal sea which brought us hither, can in a moment travel thither, and see the children sport upon the shore, and hear the mighty waters rolling evermore. Then sing, ye birds, sing, sing a joyous song, and let the young lambs bound, as to the tabor's sound, we in thought will join your throng. Ye that pipe, and ye that play, and ye that through your hearts today feel the gladness of the May, what thou the radiance which was once so bright, be now forever taken from my sight. Now nothing can bring back the hour of splendour in the grass, of glory in the flower. We will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind, in the primal sympathy which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, in the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the philosophic mind. And oh, ye fountains, meadows, hills, and groves, forebode not any severing of our loves, yet in my heart of hearts I feel your might. I only have relinquished one delight, to live beneath your more habitual sway. I love the brooks which down their channels fret, even more than when I tripped lightly as they. The innocent brightness of a newborn day is lovely yet. The clouds that gather round the setting sun, to take a sober colouring from an eye, that have kept watch o'er man's mortality, another race hath been, and other palms are won. Thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joys and fears, to me the meanest flower that blows can give, thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Oh goodness me. Not only are we moving on to another poet, but I do think that this is the final poem in the entire anthology. I mean, it is number 100, so that does make sense, given that this anthology is called the 100 Best English Poems. That's right, isn't it? Yep. Okie dokie. So let's quickly have a look and see who Sir Henry Wotton was, and then we will read through the final poem. Sir Henry Wotton, 1568 to 1639. Goodness, so he was Elizabethan then. So he would have been contemporaneous with Shakespeare. Was an English author, diplomat and politician who sat in the House of Commons in 1614 and 1625 when on a mission to Augsburg. In 1604 he famously said, "An ambassador is an honest gentleman sent to lie abroad for the good of his country." So, Let's read a bit about his life before we continue. The son of Thomas Wotton and his second wife, Eleonora Finch, Henry was the youngest brother of Edward Wotton, 1st Baron Wotton, and grandnephew of the diplomat Nicholas Wotton, and Margaret Wotton, Marchioness of Dorset, which I may be mispronouncing. Henry was born at Bocton Hall in the parish of Bocton, or Boughton, Malherbe, Kent. He was educated at Winchester College and at New College, Oxford, where he matriculated on the 5th of June 1584. What's matriculated? To enrol as a member of a body, especially of a college or university. Interesting. Right, where was I? Alongside John Hoskins. 2 years later he moved to Queen's College, graduating in 1588. As at Oxford he was the friend of Alberto Gentili, then Professor of Civil Law, and of John Donne. During his residence at Queen's he wrote a play, Tancredo, which has not survived, but his chief interests appear to have been scientific. In qualifying for his MA degree he read 3 lectures de oculo, and to the end of his life he continued to interest himself in physical experiments. His father, Thomas Wotton, died in 1587, leaving Henry only 100 marks a year. About 1589, Wotton went abroad with a view probably to preparation for a diplomatic career, and his travels appear to have lasted for about 6 years. At Altdorf he met Edward, Lord Zouch, to whom he later addressed a series of letters, which contain much political and other news and provide a record of his journey. He travelled by way of Vienna and Venice to Rome, and in 1593 spent some time at Geneva in the house of Isaac Casaubon, to whom he contracted a considerable debt. He returned to England in 1594, and in the next year was admitted to the Middle Temple. While abroad he had from time to time provided Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, with information. He now definitely entered his service as one of his agents or secretaries. It was his duty to supply intelligence of affairs in Transylvania, Poland, Italy and Germany. He served as Essex's secretary in Ireland from the 15th of April 1599 until the 4th of September 1599. That's interesting. I wonder what the role of a secretary to Ireland was. A key political office in the British administration in Ireland, nominally subordinate to the Lord Lieutenant, and officially the Chief Secretary to the Lord Lieutenant. From early 19th century until the end of British rule, he was effectively dum-de-dum-de-dum. Okay. Wotton was not like his unfortunate fellow secretary Henry Cuff, who was hanged at Tyburn in 1601, directly involved in Essex's downfall. But he thought it prudent to leave England, and within 16 hours of his patron's apprehension he was safe in France, whence he travelled to Venice and Rome. In 1602 he was living at Florence. I think for now we'll skip the rest of that. Often I like to read through these biographical sections because sometimes you get some insight into important life events that may have influenced a poet's poetry. Certainly we've seen that before with who was it? One of the poets whose poems we were reading, their sister had suffered from mental health issues all their life and ultimately even killed their mother in one of their attacks, and that ended up coming up in one of the poems, but in a I wouldn't call it cryptic language, but in slightly ambiguous language. So it can be useful, but in this case it largely seems to be talking about his diplomatic career, which is interesting, but I'll be surprised if it has much bearing on the poetry. So, what does it have to say about his works? Of 25 poems printed in Relique Wotton Ianae, Watonia, nay, probably. I'm guessing. Reliquae Wattingia, nay. 15 are Wattons, of these 2 are well known. O his mistress, the Queen of Bohemia, and the character of a happy life. Another much quoted work is his epitaph for Elizabeth Apsley, the widow of his nephew Sir Albertus Morton. He first deceased, she for a little tried to live without him, liked it not, and died. Goodness. That's quite that's quite emotionally powerful. That's very compact language given how emotionally powerful it is. It gets a lot of emotion in a small space. During his lifetime he published 2 works, The Elements of Architecture, which is a free translation of De Architectura by Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, executed during his time in Venice, and a Latin prose address to the king on his return from Scotland. Wotton shares authorship of the quote, "Well, building hath 3 conditions, firmness, commodity, and delight," with Vitruvius, from whose De Architectura Wotton translated the phrase. Some have termed his Elements a paraphrase rather than a true translation, and the quote is often attributed to Vitruvius. In 1651 appeared the Reliquae Watinianae with Isaac Walton's life. Anyway, so briefly speaking, that's who Henry Wotton was. And the poem we have from him is On His Mistress, the Queen of Bohemia. You meaner beauties of the night, that poorly satisfy our eyes, more by your number than your light, you common people of the skies, what are you when the moon shall rise? You curious chanters of the wood, that warble forth Dame Nature's lays, thinking your passions understood by your weak accents, what's your praise, when Philomel her voice shall rise? You violets at first appear, by your pure purple mantles known, like the proud virgins of the year, as if the spring were all your own. What are you when the rose is blown? So when my mistress shall be seen, in form and beauty of her mind, by virtue first, then choice, a queen, tell me if she were not designed, the eclipse and glory of her kind. Interesting. So, what was it? There was a word there I want to look up. Philomel. That sounds like an individual, possibly mythological. Philomela is another name for Philomela, a character from Greek mythology. Hold on, I just saw something interesting. Nature, a nightingale. That seems likely. There was a lot of poetry that referred to nightingales because they were thought to have one of the most beautiful songs. Philomela is a minor figure in Greek mythology who is frequently invoked as a direct and figurative symbol in literary and artistic works in the Western canon. Philomela was known as being the princess of Athens and the younger of 2 daughters of Pandion I, king of Athens, and the naiad Zeuxbe, which I'm certain I'm mispronouncing. Her sister, Procne, was the wife of King Tereus of Thrace. Philomela's other siblings were Erechtheus, Butes, and possibly Teuthras. While the myth has several variations, the general depiction is that Philomela, after being raped and mutilated by her sister's husband, Tereus, obtains her revenge and is transformed into a nightingale, a bird renowned for its song. Because of the violence associated with the myth, the song of the nightingale is often depicted or interpreted as a sorrowful lament. In nature, the female nightingale is actually mute, and only the male of the species sings. That is very interesting. I did not know that. Ovid and other writers have made the association that the etymology of her name was lover of song, derived from the Greek for song instead of fruit or sheep. The name means lover of fruit, lover of apples, or lover of sheep. Okay. So that's who is being referred to by Philomel. So, what do we have in terms of rhyming structure? It's AB, ABB, which is quite a common structure. That has a name, doesn't it? What's that form called? Oh, that's funny. I can't find it where I expected to find it. Oh well. I thought that was a form with a name. Perhaps it is and I've just forgotten it, or perhaps I'm mistaken. Anyway, what else do we have? Rhythmic structure. I'm pretty sure it's iambic tetrameter. Not pentameter, interestingly. It's quite good actually, quite well written. Anyway, that's it. We've looked at the words. I don't think there are any other words that required looking up. If there's any words you'd like defined or discussed, please leave a comment. We've looked at the rhyming and rhythmic structure. As for the meaning, I think it's largely just praise upon the speaker's mistress, is it not? Essentially claiming all other women are quite clearly inferior. They're just outright eclipsed by his mistress's merits. Could be wrong, but that's how it seems. So I'll move on to the final reading. Again, if you have any questions about anything or anything you'd like to discuss, please leave a comment. You meaner beauties of the night, that poorly satisfy our eyes, more by your number than your light, you common people of the skies, what are you when the moon shall rise? You curious chanters of the wood, that warble forth Dame Nature's lays, thinking your passions understood by your weak accents, what's your praise when Philomel her voice shall rise? You violets that first appear, by your pure purple mantles known, like the proud virgins of the year, as if the spring were all your own, what are you when the rose is blown? So when my mistress shall be seen, in form and beauty of her mind, by virtue first, then choice, a queen, tell me if she were not designed, the eclipse and glory of her kind. It is good, isn't it? I mean, regardless of how you feel about the sentiments of the meaning, it's both technically good, but also does a good job of creating strong imagery to reinforce its thesis. Of course, the first stanza is comparing stars to the moon, even though it doesn't explicitly call out the things he's describing as stars. The next stanza compares more common birds to the nightingale. Then the third stanza, violets to a rose. And finally, other women to the speaker's mistress. It's good. Anyway, that actually concludes this book. We've got there in the end. So, I guess next week when we do poetry, I will have to begin on some other work, which will be interesting. I've got a pretty good idea what that will be, but goodness, gotten to the end of our first book of poetry. What a watershed moment. Anyway, Frankenstein. So, to recap, last week we read through chapters 18, 19 and 20, I believe. So, in chapter 18, Victor has trouble starting his odious work. Just to recap slightly further, in the previous chapter, his creature had approached him and demanded that Victor make for him a female as a companion, and then promises that if he does so, he will quit the civilized world, or the creature and his future mate will quit the civilized world and leave everyone alone. All he wants is a companion. Victor was against that, but ultimately agreed. So that brings us to, as I say, chapter 18. Victor has trouble starting his odious work. During a conversation with his father, it is revealed Victor is to be married to Elizabeth in the future. Victor also obtains permission to go to England, ostensibly on a holiday, directly before he is to get married. In reality, it is so Victor can obtain important information from various English philosophers. Elizabeth persuaded Clerval to join Victor. That's one of Victor's childhood friends. And so the two companions head off. One in great spirits, the other a shell of his former self. Because of course, Victor first took the experience of seeing his creature after he created it very, very poorly. And then afterwards, of course, there were the deaths, which have hit him hard. So Victor still hasn't really recovered, and now he's being asked to create another. Then in chapter 19, Clerval and Victor visit many notable places in England, and are never short of English companions with which to discourse. Victor manages to get the information he needed privately, whereas Clerval seemed to simply enjoy the lifestyle of moving from one interesting place to the next in fairly rapid succession, whilst continually meeting new people. Shortly after arriving in Scotland to visit a friend, Victor persuades Clerval to part with him for 1 to 2 months. Victor travels to the Orkneys to begin his odious work in earnest. So in other words, he's got the information he needs. He now needs to get on with creating this mate for the creature, but without prying eyes on him. And he thinks that the Orkneys are secluded enough to do that. Chapter 20. Victor's work was well underway when he started to have further doubts, in particular what would happen if his creature and this new one produced children. At that very moment he spies his creature staring into his laboratory through a casement with a countenance that Victor believes expresses the utmost extent of malice and treachery. In a fit of passion, Victor destroys the proto-creature on whose future existence his existing creature's future happiness depends. Leaving the room, Victor swore never to resume his labours. A few hours later, the creature enters Victor's dwelling and confronts him. Upon Victor making his position clear, the creature swore revenge, asserting that while he may one day die, first you, my tyrant tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery, and giving a cryptic promise that he will be with Victor on his wedding night. Before quitting the Orkneys, Victor had to clean and arrange his instruments and clear the room of any evidence of his work. To this end, the following night, Victor takes a basket containing the proto-creature's remains aboard a little skiff. While he was successful in disposing of the remains, Victor became lost at sea, eventually landing on Ireland, where he was treated most unhospitably, accused of murder almost upon arrival, and then ordered to appear before Magistrate Kerwin under escort. And so that's where we left off. He's arrived on Ireland, washing up there essentially, and now suddenly he finds himself unexpectedly on trial for murder. So, Chapter 21. I was soon introduced into the presence of the magistrate, an old benevolent man, with calm and mild manners. He looked upon me, however, with some degree of severity, and then, turning towards my conductors, he asked who appeared as witnesses on this occasion. About half a dozen men came forward, and one being selected by the magistrate, he deposed that he had been out fishing the night before with his son and brother-in-law, Daniel Nugent, when about 10 o'clock they observed a strong northerly blast rising, and they accordingly put in for port. It was a very dark night, as the moon had not yet risen. They did not land at the harbour, but as they had been accustomed at a creek about 2 miles below, he walked on first, carrying a part of the fishing tackle, and his companions followed him at some distance. As he was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something, and fell at his length on the ground. His companions came up to assist him, and by the light of their lantern they found that he had fallen on the body of a man who was to all appearance dead. The first supposition was that it was the corpse of some person who had been drowned and was thrown on the shore by waves. But on examination they found the clothes were not wet, and even that the body was not then cold. They instantly carried it to the cottage of an old woman near the spot, and endeavoured, but in vain, to restore it to life. It appeared to be a handsome young man, about 25 years of age. He had apparently been strangled, for there was no sign of any violence except the black mark of fingers on his neck. The first part of the deposition did not in the least interest me. When the mark of the fingers was mentioned, I remembered the murder of my brother, and felt myself extremely agitated. My limbs trembled, and a mist came over my eyes, which obliged me to lean on a chair for support. The magistrate observed me with a keen eye, and of course drew an unfavourable augury from my manner. The son confirmed his father's account, but when Daniel Nugent was called, he saw positively, just before the fall of his companion, he saw a boat with a single man in it, at a short distance from the shore, and as far as he could judge by the light of the stars, it was the same boat in which I just landed. A woman deposed that she lived near the beach, and was standing at the door of a cottage, waiting for the return of the fisherman, about an hour before she heard of the discovery of the body, when she saw a boat with only one man in it, pushed off from the part of the shore where the corpse was afterwards found. Another woman confirmed the account of the fisherman having brought the body into her house. It was not cold. They put it into a bed and rubbed it, and Daniel went to the town for an apothecary, but life was quite gone. Several other men were examined concerning my landing, and they agreed that with strong north wind that had arisen during the night, it was very probable that I had beaten about for many hours and had been obliged to return nearly to the same spot from which I had departed. Besides, he observed that it appeared that I had brought the body from another place, and it was likely that as I did not appear to know the shore, I might have put into the harbour ignorant of the distance of the town of ... from the place where I had deposited the corpse. Mr. Kerwin, on hearing this evidence, desired that I should be taken into the room where the body lay for interment, that it might be observed what effect the sight of it would produce upon me. This idea was probably suggested by the extreme agitation I had exhibited when the mode of the murder had been described. I was accordingly conducted by the magistrate and several other persons to the inn. I could not help being struck by the strange coincidences that had taken place during this eventful night, but knowing that I had been But knowing that I had been conversing with several persons in the island I had inhabited about the same time that the body had been found, I was perfectly tranquil as to the consequence of the affair. I entered the room where the corpse lay, and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations in beholding it? I feel yet parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering in agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and the witnesses passed like a dream from my memory when I saw lifeless the form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. I gasped for breath, and throwing myself on the body, I exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henry, of life? Too, I have already destroyed, other victims await their destiny, but you, Clerval, my friend, my benefactor." The human frame could no longer support the agonies that I endured, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. A fever succeeded to this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. My ravings, as I afterward heard, were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William of Justine and of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend by whom I was tormented, and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasped my neck and screamed aloud with agony and terror. Fortunately, as I spoke my native language, Mr. Cohen alone understood me, but my gestures and bitter cries were sufficient to affright the other witnesses. Why did I not die? More miserable than man ever was before. Why did I not sink into forgetfulness and rest? Death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope, and the next a prey for worms and the decay of the tomb? Of what materials was I made, that I could thus resist so many shocks which, like the turning of the wheel, continually renewed the torture? I think this is a particularly poignant paragraph, given that, one, it shows how historically people, I think, were a lot more conscious of the fact that you really don't know how many more days you have upon this earth. Because nowadays with modern medicine, obviously people aren't immortal. Obviously people, even young people, do die occasionally, but it's much, much rarer. You don't get anything like the same number of premature deaths as you did back then. And I think this paragraph reflects that. But also it's poignant because, of course, Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley lost a child probably around the time this was written. I'm not sure if this was... I know Frankenstein was started before the child was lost, at least if I remember the chronology correctly, but I don't know when this was finished. So it's quite possible this was written during their period of Great Depression, shortly after their poor child had died. Could be wrong, might have been written beforehand, but still, quite poignant. Anyway, where was I? But I was doomed to live, and in 2 months found myself as awakening from a dream, in a prison, stretched on a wretched bed, surrounded by jailers, turnkeys, bolts, and all the miserable apparatus of a dungeon. It was morning, I remember, when I thus awoke to understanding. I had forgotten the particulars of what had happened, and only felt as if some great misfortune had suddenly overwhelmed me. When I looked around and saw the barred windows, and the squalidness of the room in which I was, all flashed across my memory, and I groaned bitterly. This sound disturbed an old woman who was sleeping in a chair beside me. She was a hired nurse, the wife of one of the turnkeys, and her countenance expressed all those bad qualities which often characterise that class. The lines of her face were hard and rude, like that of persons accustomed to see without sympathising in sights of misery. A tone expressed her entire indifference. She addressed me in English, and the voice struck me as one that I had heard during my sufferings. "Are you better now, sir?" said she. That's, interesting, isn't it? So hard and rude. "Are you better now, sir?" I replied in the same language with a feeble voice. "I believe I am, but if it be all true, if indeed I do not dream, I am sorry that I am still alive to this misery and horror." "For that matter," replied the old woman, "if you mean about the gentleman you murdered, I believe that it were better for you if you were dead, for I fancy it will go hard with you. However, that's none of my business. I am sent to nurse you and get you well. I do my duty with a safe conscience. It were well if everybody did the same." I turned with loathing from the woman who could utter so unfeeling a speech to a person just saved, on the very edge of death, but I felt languid and unable to reflect on all that had passed. The whole series of my life appeared to me as a dream. I sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. As the images that floated before me became more distinct, I grew feverish. A darkness pressed to get around me. No one was near me who soothed me with the gentle voice of love. No dear hand supported me. The physician came and prescribed medicines, and the old woman prepared them for me, but utter carelessness was visible in the first, and the expression of brutality was strongly marked in the visage of the second, who could be interested in the fate of a murderer, but the hangman who would gain his fee. These were my first reflections, but I soon learned that Mr. Cohen had shown me extreme kindness. He had caused the best room in the prison to be prepared for me. Wretched indeed was the best, and it was he who had provided a physician and a nurse. It is true he seldom came to see me, for although he ardently desired to relieve the sufferings of every human creature, he did not wish to be present at the agonies and miserable ravings of a murderer. He came, therefore, sometimes to see that I was not neglected, but his visits were short and with long intervals. One day, while I was gradually recovering, I was seated in a chair, my eyes half open and my cheeks livid like those in death. I was overcome by gloom and misery, and often reflected I had better seek death than desire to remain in a world which to me was replete with wretchedness. At one time I considered whether I should not declare myself guilty, and suffer the penalty of the law, less innocent than poor Justine had been. Such were my thoughts when the door of my apartment was opened, and Mr. Cohen entered. His countenance expressed sympathy and compassion. He drew a chair close to mine and addressed me in French. "I fear that this place is very shocking to you. Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? I thank you, but all that you mention is nothing to me. On the whole earth there is no comfort which I am capable of receiving. I know that the sympathy of a stranger can be but of little relief to one borne down as you are by so strange a misfortune, but you will, I hope, soon quit this melancholy abode, for doubtless evidence can easily be brought to free you from the criminal charge. This is my least concern. I am, by course of strange events, become the most miserable of mortals. Persecuted and tortured as I am, and have been, can death be any evil to me? Nothing indeed could be more unfortunate and agonizing than the strange chances that have lately occurred. You were thrown by some surprising accident on this shore, renowned for his hospitality, seized immediately and charged with murder. The first sight that was presented to your eyes was the body of your friend, murdered in so unaccountable a manner, and placed as it were by some fiend across your path." And Mr. Cohen said this, notwithstanding the agitation I endured on this retrospect on my sufferings. I also felt considerable surprise at the knowledge he seemed to possess concerning me. I suppose some astonishment was exhibited in my countenance, for Mr. Cohen hastened to say, "Immediately upon your being taken ill, all the papers that were on your person were brought me. Surely that should be brought to me. On your person were brought to me, and I examined them that I might discover some trace by which I could send your relations an account of your misfortune and illness. I found several letters, and among others, one which I discovered from its commencement to be from your father. I instantly wrote to Geneva. Nearly 2 months have elapsed since the departure of my letter. But you are ill. Even now you tremble. You are unfit for agitation of any kind. The suspense is 1,000 times worse than the most horrible event. Tell me what new scene of death had been acted, and whose murder I am now to lament." "Your family is perfectly well," said Mr. Cohen with gentleness, "and someone, a friend, is to come to visit you." I know not by what chain of thought the idea presented itself, but it instantly darted into my mind that the murderer had come to mock at my misery and taunt me with the death of Clerval. As a new incitement for me to comply with his hellish desires, I put my hand before my eyes and cried out in agony, "Oh, take him away, I cannot see him. For God's sake, do not let him enter." Mr. Coleman regarded me with a troubled countenance. He could not help regarding my exclamation as a presumption of guilt, and said in a rather severe tone, "I should have thought, young man, that the presence of your father would have been welcome instead of inspiring such violent repugnance." "My father!" cried I, with every feature and every muscle, while every feature and every muscle was relaxed from anguish to pleasure. "It is my father indeed come. How kind, how very kind! But where is he? Why does he not hasten to me?" My change of manner surprised and pleased the magistrate. Perhaps he thought that my former exclamation was a momentary return of my delirium, and now he instantly resumed his former benevolence. He rose and quitted the room with my nurse, and in a moment my father entered. Nothing at this moment could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father. I stretched out my hand to him and cried, "Are you then safe? And Elizabeth? And Ernest?" My father calmed me with assurances of their welfare, and endeavoured, by dwelling on these subjects so interesting to my heart, to raise my desponding spirits. But he soon felt that prison cannot be the abode of cheerfulness. "What a place it is that you inhabit, my son," said he, looking mournfully at the barred windows and wretched appearance of the room. You travel to seek happiness, but a fatality seems to pursue you. And poor Clerval. The name of my unfortunate and murdered friend was an agitation too great to endure in my weak state. I shed tears. Alas, yes, my father, replied I, some destiny of the most horrible kind hangs over me, and I must live to fulfil it, or surely I should have died on the coffin of Henry. You are not allowed to converse for any length of time, for the precarious state of my health rendered every precaution necessary that could ensure tranquillity. Mr. Cohen came in and insisted that my strength should not be exhausted by too much exertion, but the appearance of my father was to me like that of a good angel, and I gradually recovered my health. As my sickness quitted me, I was absorbed by a gloomy and black melancholy that nothing could dissipate. The image of Clerval was forever before me, ghastly and murdered. More than once the agitation into which these reflections threw me made my friends dread a dangerous relapse. Alas, why did they preserve so miserable and detestable... Alas, why did they preserve so miserable and detested a life? It was surely that I might fulfil my destiny, which is now drawing to a close. Soon, oh, very soon, will death extinguish these throbbings, and relieve me from the mighty weight of anguish that bears me to the dust. And in executing the award of justice I shall also sink to rest. Then the appearance of death was distant, although the wish was ever present to my thoughts, and I often sat for hours, motionless and speechless, wishing for some mighty revolution that might bury me and my destroyer in its ruins. That's an interesting use of the word revolution. Anyway, the season of assizes approached. I had already been 3 months in prison, and although I was still weak and in continual danger of relapse, was obliged to travel nearly 100 miles to the county town where the court was held. Mr. Cohen charged himself with every care of collecting witnesses and arranging my defence. I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides on life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill, on it being proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the hour the body of my friend was found, and a fortnight after my removal I was liberated from prison. My father was enraptured on finding me freed from the vexations of a criminal charge, that I was again allowed to breathe the fresh atmosphere and permitted to return to my native country. I did not participate in these feelings, for to me the walls of a dungeon or a palace were alike hateful. The cup of life was poisoned forever, and although the sun shone upon me, as upon the happy and gay of heart, I saw around me nothing but a dense and frightful darkness, penetrated by no light but the glimmer of 2 eyes that glared upon me. Sometimes they were the expressive eyes of Henry, languishing in death, the dark orbs nearly covered by the lids, and the long dark lashes that fringed them. Sometimes it was the watery clouded eyes of the monster, as I first saw them in the chamber at Ingolstadt. My father tried to awaken in me the feelings of affection. He talked of Geneva, which I should soon visit, of Elizabeth and Ernest, but these words only drew deep groans from me. Sometimes indeed I felt a wish for happiness, and thought with melancholy delight of my beloved cousin, or longed with a devouring maladie de pays. Maladie de pays? I wonder what that is. Wiktionary's got it. Homesickness. Which I'm no doubt mispronouncing. But still. So where was I? Indeed I felt a wish for happiness, and thought with melancholy delight. That's an interesting expression, melancholy delight. I suppose it has a similar meaning to bittersweet. Of my beloved cousin, I longed with a devouring maladie de pays to see once more the blue lake and the rapid Rhone that had been so dear to me in early childhood, but my general state of feeling was a torpor, in which a prison was as welcome as a residence as the divinest scene in nature. Torpor. What's a torpor? A state of being inactive a state of being inactive or stuporous, a state of apathy or lethargy. So, where were we? And these fits were seldom interrupted but by paroxysms of anguish and despair. Okay, there's our next word, paroxysms. A random or sudden outburst of activity, an explosive event during a volcanic eruption, a sudden recurrence of disease such as a seizure or a coughing fit. Interesting. At these moments I often endeavoured to put an end to the existence I loathed, and it required unceasing attendance and vigilance to restrain me from committing some dreadful act of violence. Yet one duty remained to me, the recollection of which finally triumphed over my selfish despair. It was necessary that I should return without delay to Geneva, there to watch over the lives of those I so fondly loved, and to lie in wait for the murderer, that if any chance led me to the place of his concealment, or if he dared again to blast me by his presence, I might, with unfailing aim, put an end to the existence of the monstrous image which I had endured with the mockery of a soul still more monstrous. Which I had endued with the mockery of a soul still more monstrous. Now that's interesting, the mockery of a soul, because of course in Christian theology, it is God who imparts every unborn child with a soul, a divine soul which stays with them until certainly the end of their life, and ultimately till the end of days when the soul itself goes to heaven. Now, endued with the mockery of a soul is very interesting, because of course it implies that the creature doesn't have a soul, but that by Victor granting it life, the creature, it has something which resembles a soul but isn't one. Not sure how literally that's supposed to... Let me try again. Not sure how literally we're supposed to take that, but interesting language nevertheless. My father still desired to delay our departure, fearful that I could not sustain the fatigues of a journey, for I was a shattered wreck, the shadow of a human being. My strength was gone, I was a mere skeleton, and fever night and day preyed upon my wasted frame. Still, as I urged our leaving Ireland with such inquietude and impatience, my father thought it best to yield. We took our passage on board a vessel bound for Havre de Grace, which I'm undoubtedly mispronouncing, and sailed with a fair wind from the Irish shores. It was midnight. I lay on the deck, looking at the stars, and listening to the dashing of the waves. I held the darkness that shut Ireland from my sight, and my pulse beat with a feverish joy when I reflected that I should soon see Geneva. The past appeared to me in the light of a frightful dream, yet the vessel in which I was, the wind that blew me from the detested shore of Ireland, and the sea which surrounded me, told me too forcibly that I was deceived by no vision, and that Clerval, my friend and dearest companion, had fallen a victim to me in the monster of my creation. I repassed in my memory my whole life, my quiet happiness while residing with my family in Geneva, the death of my mother, and my departure for Ingolstadt. I remembered, shuddering, the mad enthusiasm that hurried me on the creation of my hideous enemy, and I called to mind the night in which she first lived. I was unable to pursue the train of thought. A thousand feelings pressed upon me, and I wept bitterly. Ever since my recovery from the fever, I had been in the custom of taking every night a small quantity of laudanum, for it was by means of this drug only that I was enabled to gain the rest necessary for the preservation of life. Oppressed by the recollection of my various misfortunes, I now swallowed double my usual quantity, and soon slept profoundly, but sleep did not afford me respite from thought and misery. My dreams presented a thousand objects that scared me. Towards morning I was possessed by a kind of nightmare. I felt the fiend's grasp in my neck, and could not free myself from it. Groans and cries rang in my ears. My father, who was watching over me, perceiving my restlessness, awoke me. The dashing waves were around, the cloudy sky above. The fiend was not here. A sense of security, a feeling that a truce was established between the present hour and the irresistible, disastrous future imparted to me a kind of calm forgetfulness, of which the human mind is by its structure peculiarly susceptible. Chapter 22. The voyage came to an end. We landed and proceeded to Paris. I soon found that I had overtaxed my strength and that I must repose before I could continue my journey. My father's care and attentions were indefatigable, but he did not know the origin of my sufferings, and sought erroneous methods to remedy the incurable ill. He wished me to seek amusement in the city. I abhorred the face of man. Oh, not abhorred. They were my brethren, my fellow beings, and I felt attracted even to the most repulsive among them as to creatures of an angelic nature and celestial mechanism, but I felt that I had no right to share their intercourse. I had unchained an enemy among them, whose joy it was to shed their blood and to revel in their groans. How they would, each and all, abhor me and hunt me from the world, did they know my unhallowed acts, and the crimes which had their source in me. My father yielded at length to my desire to avoid society, and strove by various arguments to banish my despair. Sometimes he thought that I felt deeply the degradation of being obliged to answer a charge of murder, and he endeavoured to prove to me the futility of pride. Alas, my father, said I, how little do you know me. Human beings, their feelings and passions would indeed be degraded if such a wretch as I felt pride. Justine, poor unhappy Justine, was as innocent as I, and she suffered the same charge. She died for it, and I am the cause of this. I murdered her. William, Justine, and Henry, they all died by my hands. My father had often, during my imprisonment, heard me make the same assertion. When I thus accused myself, he sometimes seemed to desire an explanation, and at others he seemed to consider it as the offspring of delirium, and that during my illness some idea of this kind had presented itself to my imagination, the remembrance of which I perceived in my convalescence. I avoided explanation, and maintained a continual silence concerning the wretch I had created. I had a persuasion that I should be supposed mad, and this in itself would forever have chained my tongue. But besides, I could not bring myself to disclose a secret which would fill my hearer with consternation, and make fear and unnatural horror the inmates of his breast. I checked, therefore, my impatient thirst for sympathy, and was silent when I would have given the world to have confided the fatal secret. Yet still words like those I have recorded would burst uncontrollably from me. I could offer no explanation of them, but their truth in part relieved the burden of my mysterious woe. Upon this occasion my father said, with an expression of unbounded wonder, "My dearest Victor, what infatuation is this? My dear son, I entreat you never to make such an assertion again." "I am not mad," I cried energetically. "The sun and the heavens, who have viewed my operations, can bear witness of my truth. I am the assassin of the most innocent victims. They died by my machinations. 1,000 times would I have shed my own blood, drop by drop, to have saved their lives, but I could not, my father. Indeed, I could not sacrifice the whole human race." The conclusion of this speech convinced my father that my ideas were deranged, and he instantly changed the subject of our conversation, and endeavoured to alter the course of my thoughts. He wished as much as possible to obliterate the memory of the scenes that had taken place in Ireland, and never alluded to them, or suffered me to speak of my misfortunes. As time passed away, I became more calm. Misery had her dwelling in my heart, but I no longer talked in the same incoherent manner of my own crimes. Sufficient for me was the consciousness of them. By the utmost self-violence I curbed the imperious voice of wretchedness. Imperious. Mighty or powerful, domineering, arrogant or overbearing, urgent, obsolete, imperial or regal. Oh, imperious. Yep, that's on me. Of course it's imperious. By the utmost self-violence I curbed the imperious voice of wretchedness, which sometimes desired to declare itself to the whole world, and my manners were calmer and more composed than they had ever been since my journey to the Sea of Ice. A few days before we left Paris on our way to Switzerland, I received the following letter from Elizabeth. "My dear friend, it gave me the greatest pleasure to receive a letter from my uncle dated at Paris. You are no longer at a formidable distance. and I may hope to see you in less than a fortnight. My poor cousin, how much you must have suffered. I expect to see you looking even more ill than when you quitted Geneva. This winter has been passed most miserably, tortures I have been by anxious suspense, yet I hope to see peace in your countenance, and to find that your heart is not totally void of comfort and tranquillity. Yet I hear that the same feelings now exist that made you so miserable a year ago, even perhaps augmented by time. I would not disturb you at this period, when so many misfortunes weigh upon you, but a conversation that I had with my uncle previous to his departure renders some explanation necessary before we meet. Explanation? You may possibly say. What can Elizabeth have to explain? If you really say this, my questions are answered, and all my doubts satisfied. But your distance from me, and it is possible that you may dread and yet be pleased with this explanation, and in a probability of this being the case, I dare not any longer postpone writing what, during your absence, I often wished to express to you, but have never had the courage to begin. You well know, Victor, that our union had been the favourite plan of your parents ever since our infancy. We were told this when young, and taught to look forward to it as an event that would certainly take place. We were affectionate playfellows during childhood, and, I believe, dear and valued friends to one another as we grew older, but as brother and sister often entertains a lively affection towards each other, without desiring a more intimate union, may not such also be our case? Tell me, dearest Victor, answer me, I conjure you, by our mutual happiness with simple truth, do you not love another? You have travelled, you have spent several years of your life at Ingolstadt, and I confess to you, my friend, that when I saw you last autumn so unhappy, flying to solitude from the society of every creature, I could not help supposing that you might regret our connection, and believe yourself bound in honour to fulfil the wishes of your parents, although they oppose themselves to your inclinations. This is false reasoning. I confess to you, my friend, that I love you, and that in my airy dreams of futurity, you have been my constant friend and companion. But it is your happiness I desire as well as my own, when I declare to you that a marriage would render me eternally miserable unless it were the dictate of your own free choice. Even now I weep to think that, borne down as you are by the cruellest misfortunes, you may stifle, by the word honour, all hope of that love and happiness which would alone restore you to yourself. I, who have so disinterested an affection for you, may increase your miseries tenfold by being an obstacle to your wishes. Ah, Victor, be assured that your cousin and playmate has too sincere a love for you not to be made miserable by this supposition. I should point out that cousin is a term of endearment they use for each other. She's not actually related to him, even though they did grow up together. She's an adopted member of the family. In fact, not even strictly adopted in the legal sense, I don't think. Anyway. Be happy, my friend, and if you obey me in this one request, remain satisfied that nothing on earth will have the power to interrupt my tranquillity. Do not let this letter disturb you. Do not answer tomorrow or the next day, or even until you come, if it will give you pain. My uncle will send me news of your health, and if I see but one smile on your lips when we meet, occasioned by this or any other exertion of mine, I shall need no other happiness. Elizabeth Lazenza, Geneva, May the 18th, 17 dash. How did she begin the letter? Where was it? My dear friend, and then Elizabeth Lazenza. So that is significantly less personal salutation and valediction than in previous letters, I think. She's being a little more formal and distant, presumably because the nature of the letter is she's concerned that he may have another beau, and that he feels bound to marry her even though he wishes it not. That's what I would draw from it anyway. This letter revived in my memory what I had before forgotten, the threat of the fiend. I will be with you on your wedding night. Such was my sentence, and on that night would the demon employ every art to destroy me and tear me from the glimpse of happiness which promised partly to console my sufferings. On that night he had determined to consummate his crimes by my death. Well, be it so. A deadly struggle would then assuredly take place, in which if he were victorious I should be at peace, and his power over me be at an end. If he were vanquished, I should be a free man. Alas, what freedom! Such as a peasant enjoys when his family have been massacred before his eyes, his cottage burnt, his lands laid waste, and he is turned adrift, homeless, penniless, and alone, but free. Such would be my liberty, except that in my Elizabeth I possess the treasure, alas, balanced by those horrors of remorse and guilt which would pursue me until death. Sweet and beloved Elizabeth, I read and reread her letter, and some softened feeling stole into my heart, and dared to whisper paradisiacal. Paradisiacal? Of or resembling paradise. So perhaps it's paradisiacal. Whisper paradisiacal dreams of love and joy, but the apple was already eaten, and the angel's arms barred to drive me from all hope, yet would die to make her happy. That's a nice turn of phrase, actually, but the apple was already eaten, and then to clarify that it's a biblical reference, and the angel's arm barred to drive me from all hope. Interesting. Anyway, yet would die to make her happy. If the monster executed his threat, death was inevitable. Yet again I considered whether my marriage would hasten my fate. My destruction might indeed arrive a few months sooner, but if my torturer should suspect that I postponed it, influenced by his menaces, he would surely find other and perhaps more dreadful means of revenge. He had vowed to be with me on my wedding night, yet he did not consider that threat as binding him to peace in the meantime, for as if to show me that he was not yet satisfied with blood, he had murdered Clerval immediately after the enunciation of his threats. I resolved, therefore, that if my immediate union with my cousin would conduce either to hers or my father's happiness, my adversary's designs against my life should not retard it a single hour. In this state of mind I wrote to Elizabeth. My letter was calm and affectionate. I fear, my beloved girl, I said, little happiness remains for us on earth, yet all that I may one day enjoy is centred in you. Chase away your idle fears. To you alone do I consecrate my life and my endeavours for contentment. I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror, and then, far from being surprised at my misery, you will only wonder that I survived what I have endured. I will confide this tale of misery and terror to you the day after our marriage shall take place. For my sweet cousin, there must be perfect confidence between us. Until then, I conjure you, do not mention or allude to it. This I must earnestly entreat, and I know you will comply. In about a week after the arrival of Elizabeth's letter, we returned to Geneva. The sweet girl welcomed me with warm affection, yet tears were in her eyes as she beheld my emaciated frame and feverish cheeks. I saw a change in her also. She was thinner and had lost much of that heavenly vivacity that had before charmed me, but her gentleness and soft looks of compassion made her a more fit companion for one blasted and miserable as I was. The tranquillity which I now enjoyed did not endure. Memory brought madness with it, and when I thought of what had passed, a real insanity possessed me. Sometimes I was furious and burnt with rage, sometimes low and despondent. I neither spoke nor looked at anyone, but sat motionless, bewildered by the multitude of miseries that overcame me. Elizabeth alone had the power to draw me from these fits. Her gentle voice would soothe me when transported by passion, and inspire me with human feelings when sunk in torpor. She wept with me, and for me. When reason returned, she would remonstrate, and endeavour to inspire me with resignation. Ah, it is well for the unfortunate to be resigned, but for the guilty there is no peace. The agonies of remorse poison the luxury there is otherwise sometimes found in indulging the excess of grief. That's interesting. The agonies of remorse poison the luxury there is otherwise sometimes found in indulging the excess of grief. That is interesting. Soon after my arrival, my father spoke of my immediate marriage with Elizabeth. I remained silent. Have you, then, some other attachment? None on earth. I love Elizabeth, and I look forward to our union with delight. Let the day therefore be fixed, and on it I will consecrate myself, in life or death, to the happiness of my cousin. My dear Victor, do not speak thus. Heavy misfortunes have befallen us, but let us only cling closer to what remains, and transfer our love for those whom we have lost, to those whom yet live. Our circle will be small, but bound close by the ties of affection and mutual misfortune, and when time shall have softened your despair, new and dear objects of care will be born to replace those of whom we have so cruelly deprived. we have been so cruelly deprived. Such were the lessons of my father, but to me the remembrance of the threat returned. Nor can you wonder that, omnipotent as the fiend had been in his deeds of blood, I should almost regard him as invincible, and that when he had pronounced the words, "I shall be with you on your wedding night," I should regard the threatened fate as unavoidable. But death was no evil to me, if the loss of Elizabeth were balanced with it, and I therefore, with a contented and even cheerful countenance, agreed with my father that if my cousin would consent, the ceremony should take place in 10 days, and thus put, as I imagined, a seal to my fate. Great God, if for one instant I had thought what might be the hellish intention of my fiendish adversary, I would rather have banished myself forever from my native country and wandered a friendless outcast over the earth, than have consented to this miserable marriage. But as if possessed of magic powers, the monster had blinded me to his real intentions, and I thought that I had prepared only my own death, I hastened that of a far dearer victim. As the period fixed for our marriage drew nearer, whether from cowardice or prophetic feeling, I felt my heart sink within me, but I concealed my feelings by an appearance of hilarity that brought smiles and joy to the countenance of my father, but hardly deceived the ever watchful and nicer eye of Elizabeth. She looked forward to our union with placid contentment, not unmingled with a little fear, which past misfortunes had impressed, that what now appeared certain and tangible happiness might soon dissipate into an airy dream, and leave no trace but deep and everlasting regret. Preparations were made for the event, congratulatory visits were received, and all wore a smiling appearance. I shut up as well as I could in my own heart the anxiety that preyed there, and entered with seeming earnestness into the plans of my father, although they might only serve as the decorations of my tragedy. Through my father's exertions, a part of the inheritance of Elizabeth had been restored to her by the Austrian government. A small possession on the shores of... Wait, how did they manage that? Through my father's exertions, a part of the inheritance of Elizabeth had been restored to her by the Austrian government. A small possession on the shores of Como belonged to her. It was agreed that, immediately after our union, we should proceed to Villa Lorenza and spend our first days of happiness beside the beautiful lake near which it stood. In the meantime, I took every precaution to defend my person, in case the fiend should openly attack me. I carried pistols and a dagger constantly about me, and was ever on the watch to prevent artifice. What, I wonder, does he mean by artifice? A crafty but underhanded deception. Interesting. A trick played out as ingenious but artful ruse. A strategic maneuver that uses clever means to avoid detection or capture. A tactical move to gain advantage. Something made with technical skill or contrivance. Interesting they call that archaic, because that's what immediately jumped to mind when I read artifice. But they presumably mean a crafty but underhanded deception. And by these means gained a greater degree of tranquillity. Indeed, as the period approached, the threat appeared more as a delusion, not to be regarded as worthy to disturb my peace, while the happiness I hoped for in my marriage wore a greater appearance of certainty. As the day fixed for its solemnization drew nearer, and I heard it continually spoken of as an occurrence which no accident could possibly prevent, Elizabeth seemed happy. My tranquil demeanour contributed greatly to her calm mind, but on the day that was to fulfil my wishes and destiny, she was melancholy, and a presentiment of evil pervaded her, and perhaps also she thought of the dreadful secret which I had promised to reveal to her on the following day. My father was in the meantime overjoyed, and in the bustle of preparation only recognised in the melancholy of his niece the diffidence of a bride. Diffidence, I should know what that means. Timid or shy, reticent or self-effacement. After the ceremony was performed, a large party assembled at my father's, but it was agreed that Elizabeth and I should commence our journey by water, sleeping that night at Evian, and continuing our voyage on the following day. Oh, Evian, like the brand of bottled water. The day was fair, the wind favourable, all smiled on our nuptial embarkation. Those were the last moments of my life during which I enjoyed the feeling of happiness. We passed rapidly along The sun was hot, but we were sheltered from its rays by a kind of canopy, while we enjoyed the beauty of the scene, sometimes on one side of the lake, where we saw Mont Saleve, the pleasant banks of Montalegre, and at distance, surmounting all, the beautiful Mont Blanc, and the assemblage of snowy mountains that in the vain endeavour to emulate her, sometimes coasting the opposite banks, we saw the mighty Jura opposing its dark side to the ambition that would quit its native country, and an almost insurmountable barrier to the invader who should wish to enslave it. I took the hand of Elizabeth. "You are sorrowful, my love. Ah, if you knew what I have suffered, and what I may yet endure, you would endeavour to let me taste the quiet and freedom from despair. But this one day at least permits me to enjoy." "Be happy, my dear Victor," replied Elizabeth. "There is a hope, nothing to distress you, and be assured that if a lively joy is not painted to my face, my heart is contented. Something whispers to me not to depend too much on the prospect that is opened before us, but I will not listen to such a sinister voice. Observe how fast we move along, and how the clouds, which sometimes obscure and sometimes rise above the dome of Mont Blanc, render this scene of beauty still more interesting. Look also at the innumerable fish that are swimming in the clear waters, where we can distinguish every pebble that lies at the bottom. What a divine day! How happy and serene all nature appears!" Thus Elizabeth endeavoured to divert her thoughts and mind from all reflection upon melancholy subjects, but her temper was fluctuating. Joy for a few instants shone in her eyes, but it continually gave place to distraction and reverie. The sun sunk lower in the heavens. We passed the river Drance, and observed its path through the chasms of the higher and the glens of the lower hills. The Alps here come closer to the lake, and we approached the amphitheatre of mountains which forms its eastern boundary. The spire of Evian shone under the woods that surrounded it, and the range of mountain above mountain by which it was overhung. The wind, which had hitherto carried us along with amazing rapidity, sunk at sunset to a light breeze. The soft air just ruffled the water and caused a pleasant motion. Among the trees, as we approached the shore from which it wafted the most delightful scent of flowers and hay, the sun sunk beneath the horizon as we landed, and as I touched the shore I felt those cares and fears revive, which soon were to clasp me and cling to me forever. Right, looking at the time, that will probably have to do for Frankenstein this week. So we will move on to the riddles. Of course, everyone is encouraged to participate in these riddles, offer guesses or ideas. Now, I believe, if I recall correctly anyway, that the last riddle we left off on last week was 115, which is enigmatical compliment to a literary character. Your praise and letters too will serve to show the figures they've long made all scholars know. And the solution to that one, I believe, was the letter X followed by the letter L, XL. I remember being completely bamboozled by this one because I was interpreting a literary character to mean the more common sense today, that of a character from literature, as in a fictional character. But that is certainly not the way it was intended in this riddle. I'm not sure to what extent literary character was a deliberate deception or if it's a change of language since this was written. I suspect it probably was a deliberate deception, but I could be wrong. Anyway, that was that riddle. And so now, the next one is 116, which now I read it, I think possibly that was the one we left off on instead. To nothing add 10 with 3/5 of 2 score. Yes, we have done this one. I apologise. So this was the last one we finished on. To nothing add 10 with 3/5 of 2 score, and let them be joined by 500 more. These rightly combined will give you the name of a city that's high in the annals of fame. And the answer to that was Oxford. To nothing, so 0, which looks a lot like an O, add 10, in Roman numerals that's X, with 3/5 of 2 score, Somehow they got FOR from 3/5 of 2 score. And I remember saying last week, I'm not sure how that's done. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It's possible that there's some cultural knowledge that's been lost there. You know, how you might depict fractions of a score, which is 20. I'm not sure, but somehow they got FOR from that, and then that'd be joined by 500 more, which is obviously D. In Roman numerals, 500 is D. These rightly combined will give you the name of a city that's high in the annals of fame. I didn't get that one either. If I'd got as far as OX and then ending in D, I probably would have realised, but I didn't. Anywho, that was the one we left off on. I'm fairly certain of that. So the first new riddle this week is 117. As I say, by all means, comment with your guesses or your ideas, etc. So, 117. When Sol through Ares drives his brilliant car, car here obviously doesn't mean motor car. This would presumably mean any carriage. Try to remember. Ares. That was. Was that the Greek god of war? I've got a feeling it may have been. Yes, but spelt differently. Okay. Nothing much came up when I looked up Ares spelt that way, so it may be just a spelling difference, I'm not sure. When Sol through Ares drives his brilliant car, and hostile bosoms kindle for the war. Yeah, so this almost certainly is the Greek god of war. When softer souls to sweeter pleasures rove, and melt in raptures with Idalian love. Idalian. Of or pertaining to Idalium, an ancient city of Cyprus where Aphrodite was worshipped. When blooming nature to the eye displays its pleasing pride 1,000 wanton ways, then longing mortals with impatience wait for my approach, which is as sure as fate. You'll ask from whence this expectation springs, or what the blessings that my presence brings. 'Tis this, when I appear they boldly lie, and cheat each other with impunity, practice strange frauds on what you'll scarce believe. They thought the brightest men who most deceive. Lo, here a hapless wretch with uplift eyes thanks his kind stars and grasps a tempting prize. But oh, what changes on our actions wait! What sudden scenes in life's fallacious state! Deluded fool, the bait which looks so fair now turns to filth or flits away like air. Then straight a lurking crew themselves disclose, mock at his shame and triumph at his woes. But least I seem of the fictitious kind, or virtue, vice, or passion of the mind. No, I'm the eldest of a numerous race, and as my birthright claim the leading place. My younger brethren in a train like geese pursue but keep unequal distances, and only one can at a time be seen, such an imperious curtain is drawn between. Alike we are in shape, alike in name, yet no illustrious acts my brethren claim. But pursue rules with such imperious sway, we oft change continents 10 times a day. Sometimes a glittering face with charms appear, sometimes a lowering brow bedewed with tears. But hold enough, one cries, nay, this be shown, I'm gladly seen by all. yet felt by none. Interesting. This is a difficult one. So the first few lines set up all the things that are being the longing mortals with impatience waiting for my approach. And those are when soul through errors drives his brilliant car. When softer souls to sweeter pleasures rove, when blooming nature to the eye displays. I'm not sure what when soul through errors drives his brilliant car is alluding to. And hostile bosoms kindle for the war. So on the approach of war, perhaps, and when softer souls or sweeter pleasures rove and melt in raptures with Idalian love, which presumably is a reference to Aphrodite. So when war is kindling, when lovers are enchanted with each other, when nature is blooming, impatient mortals wait for this thing's approach. And when this thing does appear, people boldly lie and cheat each other with impunity. If anything, it's the nature part which is most confusing, because the other two relate to not just human affairs, but passionate human affairs, war and love. But nature displaying its pride. Lo, here a hapless wretch with uplift eyes thanks his kind stars and grasps a tempting prize. I'm wondering if it could be the outward appearance people display, which may be false. It may not represent how they truly feel. Sometimes you see that represented figuratively as a mask. But I'm trying to think of a good simple English word for that. Japanese have a word for it. My pronunciation will be off, but it's something like tatemaya. Tatemaya. Something like that. which refers to someone's public position or attitude. But what would be the English equivalent? Well, let's see. Let's read the riddle again. When soul through errors drives his brilliant car, and hostile bosoms kindle for the war, when softer souls to sweeter pleasures rove, and melt in raptures with Idalian love, when blooming nature to the eye displays its pleasing pride a thousand wanton ways, then longing mortals of impatience wait for my approach, which is as sure as fate. You'll ask from whence this expectation springs, or what blessings that my presence brings. 'Tis this: when I appear, they boldly lie and cheat each other with impunity, practice strange frauds, and what you'll scarce believe, they are thought the brightest men who most deceive. Lo, here a hapless wretch with uplift eyes thanks his kind stars and grasps the tempting prize. But oh, what changes on our actions wait, what sudden scenes in life's fallacious state. Deluded fool, the bait which looked so fair now turns to filth or flits away like air. Then straight a lurking crew themselves disclose, mock at his shame, the triumph at his woes. And triumph at his woes. But least I seem of the fictitious kind, or virtue, vice, or passion of the mind. Now I'm the eldest of a numerous race, and as my birthright claim the leading place. My younger brethren, in a train like geese, pursue but keep unequal distances, and only one can at a time be seen, such an imperious curtain drawn between. Alike we are in shape, alike in name, yet no illustrious acts my brethren claim, but my passion rules with such imperious sway. We oft change continents 10 times a day, sometimes a glittering face with charms appear, sometimes a lowering brow bedewed with tears. But hold enough, one cries nay, this be shown, I'm gladly seen by all, yet felt by none. It does seem like it's going to be something like an expression, or a mask, or something like that, doesn't it? A pretense, although that's slightly different. But beyond that, I'm not sure, so let's see. Let's see what the answer is. What was it, 117 we were on, I think? April? I wasn't expecting that. When soul through errors drives his brilliant car. Oh, could that be an astrological observation? When the sun passes through the constellation of Aries, and hostile bosoms kindle for the war, when softer souls to sweeter pleasures rove, and melt in raptures with Idalian love, when blooming nature to the eye displays its pleasing pride a thousand wanton ways. Okay, that starts to figure. 'Cause that's going to be in the middle of spring. Then longing mortals to impatience waits for my approach, which is as sure as fate. You ask from whence this expectation springs, or what blessings that my presence brings. 'Tis this: when I appear, they boldly lie and cheat each other with impunity. I don't know what that's a reference to. That sounds like a reference to something significant, like, for example, May Day. Obviously, it isn't May Day because this is the month of April, but you know, April Fools! Oh my goodness, that must go back a long way then. Practice strange frauds, and what you'll scarce believe, they're thought the brightest who most deceive. Lo, here a hapless wretch with uplift eyes thanks his kind stars and grasps the tempting prize. But oh, what changes on our actions wait, what sudden scenes in life's fallacious state. Deluded fool, the bait which looked so fair now turns to filth or flits away like air. Then straight a lurking crew themselves disclose, mock at his shame and triumph at his woes. But least I seem of the fictitious kind, or virtue, vice, or passion of the mind. Now I'm the eldest of a numerous race, so each April Fool's going back, well, each April going back into, what's the antiquity? There's a better term for it than that, isn't there? Anyway, and as my birthright claim the leading place, my younger brethren and train like geese, pursue but keep an equal distance, and only one can at time be seen. Such an imperious curtain is drawn between, alike we are in shape, alike in name, yet no illustrious acts my brethren claim. But passion rules with such imperious sway, we oft change continents 10 times a day, because of the uncertain weather in April in Britain. Sometimes a glittering face with charms appears, sometimes a lowering brow bedewed with tears, rain. But hold enough, one cries, nay this be shown, I'm gladly seen by all, yet felt by none. Because it's not physical, it's not something you can touch. Okay, that was a lot better than I expected it to be. That I was completely bamboozled by that one. I might actually stop after just one tonight, looking at the time. Usually I do more riddles than that, but the next few aren't short ones, it doesn't seem, so yeah, why not? Bit of an anticlimax, but still. So thank you for coming, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I will be doing more poetry, prose and riddles next Wednesday. As for my other streams, Friday and Saturday and Monday are all going to be video gaming streams. I will be completing my playthrough of Abduction before I do anything else. I don't know exactly how long that's going to take me. It would be slightly surprising if it took an entire 3 more sessions, but you never know. I don't, strictly speaking, know how much of the game is left. And after that, I don't know. So, once again, thank you for coming, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Good night.